Roosevelt, do solemnly swear.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution.
The Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Our Constitution in the News. I'm Mark David Smith. This report will be about a letter authored to Biden and signed by 6 state attorney generals. I use several internet articles for my base research and base outline in this report, and I'll list them for you at the end. And you can find the details of these references on the MessianicLambNetwork.com website. And now for my research on 6 state attorney generals write a letter to Biden asking him not to overstep his authority. Lord, we ask that our government leaders would be God-fearing and recognize that they are accountable to you for each decision and act. The Shimmy Shah. West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey led a 6-state coalition writing that state attorney generals be vigilant in watching for and opposing federal outreach, especially when such action puts jobs and civil liberties at risk. According to the Attorney General's office, the letter is encouraging the newly sworn president, 1, to be mindful of the U.S. Constitution's separation of powers, and 2, the authority of sovereign states relative to that of the federal government. Mississippi's Lynn Flinch said that, and I quote, any potentially unconstitutional executive actions or federal overreach will not go unchallenged, end quote. The letter opens by saying, and I quote, Dear President Biden, 1 week ago, you assumed the presidency of the United States of America and took the oath of office. You swore to preserve, to protect, and to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. Today, we write to you in our capacity as state attorney generals regarding areas of vital importance to our states as you execute your job in the months and days ahead, end quote. Attorney General Rutledge said, and I quote, as chief legal officers of our states, we must ensure states' rights are protected, and we are prepared to do so. We are ready to utilize all available means to combat any potential federal overreach that we see, end quote. The coalition's letter, led by West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey, urges the new administration to respect individual constitutional rights, limited federal power, limited presidential power, and the need for keeping the administrative state in check. The attorneys general note particular concern for the constitutionally guaranteed rights to religious freedom and to keep and bear arms. With regard to limited federal power, they contend that the Constitution delegates a very limited sphere of influence to the federal government and leaves the remainder for states and their citizens to address. While recognizing the executive branch has much power, the coalition writes that the Constitution limits a president's authority to bypass Congress. It also notes various federal laws require the president to constrain his executive agencies. The letter explained that should the new administration govern in a manner inconsistent with those tenets, the attorneys contend it will be their responsibility and duty to challenge the administration's actions in court. The letter went on to warn the president that any actions the president might take that exceed statutory authority, that are inconsistent with constitutional law, or that risk civil liberties could result in legal action brought by states' attorney generals from West Virginia, Arkansas, Indiana, Mississippi, Montana, and Texas. Litigation is never a first option, the attorneys general said in the letter, and they offered to help the new administration implement policies that are, and I quote, consistent with the Constitution and the rule of law, end quote. The letter adds, and I quote, if cabinet officials, executive officers, and agencies go beyond the bounds of their statutory authority, fail to follow legally required procedures, or fall short of the bedrock Administrative Procedure Act, it will likewise be our responsibility to take action, end quote. Now, I might add that the Administrative Procedure Act, which governs the agency rulemaking process, has been frequently invoked to challenge executive branch rules and regulations. Many of the roughly 30 executive orders Biden signed since his inauguration overturned Trump-era policies. Others established new ones. The attorneys went on to argue, and I quote, the president cannot cut constitutional corners or shirk statutory strictures without inevitably doing more harm to our country than good, end quote. The attorneys urged the new administration to pursue policy priorities that, and I quote, honor the core constitutional tenets, which should be appreciated and respected by every person entrusted with the honor and burdens of the presidency, end quote. Let me reiterate, in the letter, they raised 3 areas of concern for potential federal overreach. These would include issues concerning freedom of religion, religious expressionism, and the right to bear arms. Within a day of issuing an order, the state of Texas was the first to sue the administration, halting deportation and changing immigration policy. A federal judge sided with Texas, preventing the order from going into effect. The attorneys made it clear they accept the responsibility to challenge any of the president's unconstitutional laws in court. Now, why did they need to write this letter? I'm sure because of the last 4 years and many things that President Trump, who I still consider is my president, had done many things that challenged the Constitution and challenged a lot of what other people believed. And they feel that to make sure that this presidency, which they're already questioning and challenging already, they want to make sure that he understands what this is all about and what the Constitution's about, and that they will hold him accountable. Interesting to me that any president should have to be addressed in this way and reminded of the constitutional laws, the things that could be overreached. It's just so hard for me to imagine that a president that is in office wouldn't already know these things. That's my opinion. Now, my main outline came from 3 online sources. They are Intercessors America, 12 WBOY, and the Center Square. You can find the full links to those on the Lamb Network website, messianic-lamb-network.com website, and find the Contemplating the Constitution webpage. Thank you for joining, and please use the Messianic Lamb Network website for all your Messianic media needs. There are over 1,400 Messianic videos on the Lamb Network website. We like to say Messianic media for the Messianic lifestyle at www.messianiclambnetwork.com. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Our Constitution in the News. I'm Mark David Smith. Now stay tuned for my research on Article 1, Section 10, Clause 2 from the Constitution of the United States on Contemplating the Constitution. We'll be right back after this.
I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
Thank you for joining me on Contemplating the Constitution. I'm Mark David Smith. Last week, I gave you my research on Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, which stated, no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque and reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title of mobility. This is called the Obligations of Contract Clause. This week, I give you my research on Article 1, Section 10, Clause 2, and next week we'll finish with Clause 3. Clause 2 states, no state shall, without the consent of the Congress, lay any imposts or duties on imports and exports, except what may be absolutely necessary for executing its inspection laws, and the net produce of all duties and imposts laid by any state on imports or exports shall be for the use of the Treasury of the United States, and all such laws shall be subject to the revision and control of the Congress. Now, if you're a longtime follower of this show, you'll recognize most of what I just read. Almost every one of those items are somewhere in the past sections of Article 1. As we enter into the last section of Article 1, we'll notice that Section 10 makes sure that all these past items have been covered in full array. Our United States were first organized under the Articles of Confederation. The states maintained significant autonomy while the national government was weak. Among the major weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation was first, inability to regulate commerce with foreign nation and the states, and second, the inability of the national government to impose taxes. The national government lacked power to enforce acts of Congress and requests for money. The states were frequently ignored. Last week, we covered contracts, which covered many the differences in collecting states, requests for money through contracts. Under the Articles of Confederation, Congress would not effectively prevent states from imposing tariffs and regulations that conflicted with Congress' efforts to regulate trade with foreign nations. There was also considerable commercial strife between the states without major ports and those with major ports, especially those who used tariffs on goods destined to other states to generate revenue. Under the Articles of Confederation, the federal government did not have any secure funding. The clause I'm talking about in this episode, which is the Import-Export Clause, was adopted by the Constitutional Convention a few days after adopting this clause. The Export Clause, which of course prohibits the federal government from imposing taxes on duties or exports. The adoption of the Import-Export Clause received considerable debate, more so than the Export Clause or the Commerce Clause we talked about in Article 1, Section 9, Clauses 5 and 6. The Constitutional Convention also decided that tariffs on imports were to be the main source of revenue for the federal government. The main source of revenue. That's interesting, isn't it? In the Federalist number 12, Alexander Hamilton made the argument that tariffs on imports would need to be the primary source of revenue for the new federal government. This way, the federal government could more effectively impose tariffs on imports than the states could separately. As just mentioned, we previously covered Article 1, Section 9, Clauses 5 and 6. These clauses basically covered several similar territories, but more along the lines of taxes, duties, and revenue on imports and exports, and how no preference can be given on any ports when involving imports and exports. This article, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 2, clearly states that states must have the permission of Congress to charge money for the buying and selling of things that come into the country and things sold outside of the country that belong to the states. If states pass laws to charge money for things that come into and go out of the country, all the money collected will go to the United States Treasury. Congress can make laws to change or control these state laws. Clause 2, the clause we're talking about tonight, prevents the states, without the consent of Congress, from imposing tariffs on imports and exports above what is necessary for their inspection laws, and secures for the federal government the revenues from all tariffs on imports and exports. Several 19th century Supreme Court cases applied this clause to duties and imports on interstate imports and exports. In 1869, the United States Supreme Court ruled that the Import-Export Clause only applied to imports and exports with foreign nations and did not apply to imports and exports with other states. The U.S. Supreme Court explains the purpose of this clause as the framers of the Constitution sought to alleviate three main concerns by committing sole power to lay imposts and duties on imports in the federal government with no concurrent state power. The federal government must speak with one voice when regulating commercial relations with foreign governments and tariffs which might affect foreign relations. Import revenues were to be the major source of revenue of the federal government and should not be diverted to the states. Harmony among the states might be disturbed unless seaboard states, with their crucial ports of entry, were prohibited from levying taxes on citizens of other states by taxing goods flowing through their ports to the other states. This has been my research on Article 1, Section 10, Clause 2. Next week, I'll give my research on the last of the articles dealing with the legislative branch of the United States government in the Constitution, and that would be Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, which states, no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops, or ships of war in times of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with another state or with a foreign power, or engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. Remember, this last section, section 10 of Article 1, deals with the states individually and how the states work with Congress through the legislative power. Okay, my base research comes from a couple of articles found on the internet. One is Wikipedia, called Import-Export Clause. Has some really good information on there. The second one is Constitutional Law Reporter, found at www.constitutionallawreporter.com. I'm Mark David Smith, and I'm your host for the Lamb Network original show broadcast, Contemplating the Constitution. Thank you very much. Be sure to tour the Messianic Lamb Network.com website and find hundreds of different videos. Thank you very much. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week. God bless.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.